From the Homestead Studios in Santa Clarita, California, it's just the Tip-Sters with Melissa Morgan.
Burn after reading.
If you've got a tip for Melissa, a sudden dangerous idea, what that bump in the night actually turned out to be, why anyone would think that giant meatballs are better than easy-to-eat bite-sized meatballs, anything, tell us about it by calling the Tipster hotline at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837, or send an email to jptipsters@gmail.com. And now here's your host. She's looking around every corner for clues and inside every catalog searching for holiday antler headwear, Melissa Morgan.
More cowbell. I have plenty of antler headwear.
Yes, but you know you're still shopping for more.
I'm not. I'm trying to dial it down.
Okay.
I really am.
All right.
I have a giant plastic tub in the garage with headgear.
I know.
That we usually pass out at parties, but of course we're not allowed to have parties anymore because we're not allowed to see other people.
Well, that's just temporary.
Yeah, sure.
Well, yeah, it does feel like it's never ending.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And speaking of bumps in the night, I am so happy that our new refrigerator has an ice maker that makes our dog lose her shit every time it makes ice.
It's amazing. It really is. It's like you think she would figure it out after the 500th time.
Yeah. No. It's like every time that the ice maker drops, ice that it has made, she is quite convinced that someone with an axe is coming up behind us.
Yeah, who's inside the refrigerator?
In the refrigerator, yeah. The refrigerator axe murderer has that's delightful.
I mean, we got a giant moving spider in our front yard for Halloween. The first time she walked by it, she barked at it. One time that was it.
Yep.
Now she walks by, it's like,
yeah. Screw you, fake blow up spider with the moving head. Yeah.
But the
first time.
Maker,
yeah, but the ice maker, that
time.
is her mortal enemy. So this is going to be a little bit of a different episode for us. It's almost like a two-parter, but I'm going to call it like 1/4 of the episode is devoted to one kind of update, and the rest of it is to another update. But before that, I want to say thank you to Jeep 999999999. That's 10 nines.
Really? 10
for the
of them?
10 nines for the lovely review on Apple Podcast. The reviewer Jeep with all the nines said that the podcast helps. I never know if it's male or female. Helps this reviewer pass the time at work. So I'm not sure what they do, but I'm glad that Jeep has a gig where they can listen to the podcast. And it something else that this reviewer said that meant a lot to me, which was that the reviewer said they like the fact that it is not a typical podcast format. And I forget that. Producer Mark opens up the mic and we do what we do.
We just started up and...
Yeah, we do what we do. And I forget, I mean, it's my love of radio, I think, comes through. A podcast is like personalized radio is how I look at it. So, we're not a typical format podcast. If you haven't figured that out by now, if you're new, welcome. And we're really grateful you're here because without you, there'd be no us. So if you're new, these are going to be two cases that you might know about, but we have covered them. So sometimes when you look back at episodes you have done, you put your head in your hands or hang your head or just pretend they don't exist because you're like, oh, things have changed so much in the last, 2.5 years since we started the podcast. But I re-listened to this episode because it was brought to my attention by a listener and who listens on YouTube, which you kids in your YouTube, I don't get. But
I love the fact that you watch you on YouTube. You watch us on YouTube and you're just staring at our logo.
Yeah, probably not staring, but listening and then doing something else, which that's one of the things I love about podcasts is that they help you to multitask. I love to listen to my favorite podcasts when I'm either driving or walking Siren, our dog, or working on a terrible, awful diamond painting, and I want to jab my own eyeballs out. So, and like the reviewer Jeep listens at work. So there's lots of ways to listen and able to do more things at once. So I thought, oh God, here we are, episode 161.
This is 161.
Yeah. So ironically, the first part of this episode is going to be going all the way back to episode number 16. And I thought, oh, it's going to be terrible. And I listened to it, and it is terrible, but it's terrible in a great way. I have an awful allergy issue, and I'm like sniffing, and I think producer Mark makes me laugh, and I cough, which at this point in the podcast, producer Mark would have cut that out. He would have had no problem cutting.
I learned how to edit.
Yeah. So it's a little, it's a little rough, but I will tell you, I made myself laugh, and that isn't a very easy thing to do. And it is the story of Vicky Lynn Morgan. And she was this beautiful woman in a weird situation with men, had a much older husband. He sold her to Alfred Bloomingdale. It's weird. It's a very odd story. And she ends up being beaten to death with a baseball bat in her West Hollywood apartment. Now, her roommate at the time confessed. He went into a police agency in a different jurisdiction to confess. And then later on recanted, saying that he was very sick with AIDS and was on a lot of medication and said it was AIDS-related psychosis and, blah, blah, blah. So the title of the episode is Tastes Like Nancy Reagan Coming Up to Bat, because it's just one of my favorite things ever. Just imagining tiny little Nancy Reagan just beating the shit out of Vicky Lynn Morgan.
It's making me laugh now.
It makes me howl. And the thing was, at the time, I believed that Nancy Reagan would have beaten Vicky Lynn Morgan to death because she was the long time mistress of the husband of her bestie friend, Betsy Bloomingdale. And now information has come out, and this wonderful listener pointed it out to me, and I was like, oh no. So I promise I'm going to circle around and it's going to make sense. If you're familiar with Humans of New York, it's a beautiful project that this photographer named Brandon Stanton started in 2010, and you probably have seen it all over social media. It's beautiful. He had this idea. He's a photographer and, an artist and a writer. He had wanted to photograph 10,000 New Yorkers and have like a catalog of his city's inhabitants. And he not only started taking pictures, he would then get a little bit of information about them, a little bit about their lives. So he started to interview them. And he's a really good writer. He's very authentic and has a great way to tell stories. So he would include quotes. Usually he wouldn't even have to gussy up the quotes of the subjects of his photos because, it's a city filled with interesting people, right? So he would take the pictures and then put the captions and then of the quotes of the people that he had photographed. And then it became a blog. And now Humans of New York has 20 million followers on all the different social media platforms. He has 3 different books with pictures and explanations of people's lives. And it's just, it's kind of blossomed. His books always are on the bestseller list. He has Humans of New York and Humans of New York : Stories. And I believe his newest one just came out, I think, October 6th. I think it's just called Humans. So in early 2020, Brandon Stanton is walking home from the gym, and it's a cold day, and he still has on his running clothes. And he gets close to his apartment, and there's a beautiful 76-year-old woman in a full-length mink coat, and she's holding onto a railing outside of an apartment. And he said, you look great. And she points at his clothes, and she goes, let me ask you a question. Why is it always that white boys wear shorts in the winter? So that's how Brandon Stanton was introduced to Stephanie Johnson, also known as Tanqueray, and they became friends. And they keep talking, and he's like, you know what? Can you just wait here for just a minute? I need to go home and get my camera. So he runs home to get his camera and he starts photographing her, and she is just exquisitely beautiful. She looks fake. She's so beautiful.
How old is she again?
76.
Really? And this is outside in the cold of January.
And she has on like a faux fur hat like Dr. Zhivago and a full-length faux mink coat. I mean, and she is beautiful. I mean, she's just, I mean, you look at her and you're like, just wow. I mean, she's just gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. So, they start to talk, and she tells him about her life. And she had started working in the 70s as a burlesque dancer, and her stage name was Tanqueray. And Brandon Stanton has taken her life and her musings, turning it into 32 installments that he has released on Facebook. And he is obviously in talks with God knows how many networks, because her life is fascinating to say the least. There's so much in her life, from her background to her mother, who she credits as being very beautiful, but says very derogatory things about her mother's use of her body to lure men. There's the fact that in the 70s, this gorgeous black woman was making what she called white woman money because she was so gorgeous and, was a dancer, stripper. She had a boyfriend named Carmine, and she didn't have to work a lot when they were together because he worked, and she left him because he had a drug problem, and she wasn't down with that. She has 2 kids. I believe that this story, going so widely known, has brought one of her estranged children back in her life. Brandon Stanton started a GoFundMe hoping to gather $300,000 for her back rent and she didn't have insurance, and some medical care he wanted to get for her. And at last count, it's about $2.7 million that has been. Yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah. So she's one of the more fascinating people in Humans of New York, for sure. And I think there's more ahead in her life and in Brandon Stanton's life. And a listener messaged me and said, look, I heard episode 16, and I think Tanqueray was really good friends with Vicky Lynn Morgan. And I was like, oh, really? Well, Tanqueray mentions a white girl named Vicky, who's her best friend, who, in her words, was messing around with Alfred Bloomingdale.
Oh, well, there you go. And this is in the
Humans in New York. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Stephanie Johnson Tanqueray also says, Vicky told me everything, and a president partook of her services.
Oh.
In the 80s.
Oh.
And would meet her in high-priced hotels.
Oh.
Upscale New York City hotels with one of his Secret Servicemen guarding the door. And Vicky told Tanqueray the only thing this president ever wanted to do was perform oral sex on her.
Well...
That is alternately the best and worst Ronald Reagan impression I've ever heard. But thank you. It was beautifully timed.
Thank you.
Now I believe I know why Nancy Reagan would bash the shit out of Vicky Lynn Morgan with a ball bat.
Not just because...
of Betsy Bloomingdale. But because apparently Ronnie had his face in her cooch. And I can't imagine anything making a wife more angry.
Oh, my God.
I mean, So, none of this is proven yet, but according to this listener, it's like this listener says, I guess we'll know soon enough. I'm guessing there'll probably be an entire book.
Oh, my God.
Or mini series. I mean, people have said, please, Netflix, make a series about Stephanie. And she is so fascinating. So fascinating. So, yeah, that's the episode 16 update. So before we get to an update on episode 19, which is part 2 of Those Darn Peterson Boys, it's the Scott Peterson case, which unless you don't open up your phone or watch a television or see a billboard
or been in a coma for the last 15 years or something,
you wouldn't know that there's a lot going on. So there's a lot going on with that case. But before we get to that, I do have to say that our friend John Grobman, who is the director of programs for Pause for Life, was a guest on a wonderful podcast called Life on the Outside. And he is on episode number 30. And it's a beautiful episode. It's a lovely podcast about people who have spent time in prison and are out, and for one reason or another. And we know that John's sentence, he got 6 life sentences for nonviolent crimes, and his sentence was commuted after he spent 13 years in prison. And it's a beautiful podcast, and John is a spectacular guest, and he will actually be a guest here again on this podcast in the future, talking about sentence reform, and the work he's doing on that. But this lovely podcast, like I said, he's episode number 30. I think it was released just this week, and it's titled 48,000. And I couldn't understand what the title meant until I heard the entire episode, which John has this statistic that just will knock the air out of you. And when an inmate gets out of prison for one reason or another, there are 48,000 things that can keep them from living a normal life, from how to get a job, how to get insurance, where to live, who's going to talk to you. It's a fascinating episode. So I wanted to say that, which is interesting and a lead in to episode 19, which is that darn Scott Peterson boy, Those Darn Peterson Boys. In August of this year, 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned Scott Peterson's death sentence. So we know...
I just heard this. That's amazing.
Right. And we know that, Governor Newsom had put a moratorium on death penalty cases anyway, but to have the California Supreme Court overturn your death sentence, and then they remanded the case to a lower court to determine his penalty, a new penalty. However, this week, the California Supreme Court ordered a second look at the conviction.
Whoa!
For killing Lacey and their unborn son, Connor.
How come I hadn't heard this?
It's
wow.
Pretty new. So, it's been less than 2 months since his death penalty, was overturned. But the California Supreme Court is like, look, we want a second look at that conviction. Now, it's pretty interesting. This is from CBS.com. So the higher court sent the case back to San Mateo County Superior Court to determine whether Peterson should receive a new trial. Now, that's the part I was like, are they actually going to recommend that he get a second trial, a retrial?
Yeah, I thought that was way in the rearview mirror now.
I did too. I was surprised that the death penalty was overturned, but then again, I thought, okay, well, I guess it could happen. But this is big, big, big. So the Supreme Court said that a juror committed prejudicial misconduct by failing to disclose that she had been involved in other legal proceedings. So Rochelle Nice is a juror, and she failed to disclose that she had obtained a restraining order against her boyfriend's ex-girlfriend for harassing her when she was pregnant.
Oh my. Whoa.
But wait, there's more. She, initially seated as an alternate, And she replaced juror number 5, which I will explain why he was dismissed. She published a book with several other jurors about their experience on the 2004 trial. And this is pretty interesting. Scott Peterson's new attorney, Cliff Gardner, filed a 423-page document with the court appealing the conviction. He said that the appeal should come because of the overwhelming publicity Peterson's trial received, incorrect evidentiary rulings, and other mistakes that deprived him of a fair trial. Now, this is the part I don't agree with. Attorney Gardner says that he was convicted after a trial that his attorney argues surpassed the O.J. Simpson murder trial in terms of publicity. That's bullshit.
That's bullshit.
However, Rochelle Nice worked hard to get on the jury. She even agreed to be on the jury as an alternate, even though her employer would not pay her for the duration of the months-long trial. She said, "Oh yeah, no, I'm willing to serve."
Oh.
And of course, all the jurors were asked if they'd ever been the victim of a crime or involved in a lawsuit, and she said no to both questions.
Well, that's perjury.
Totally. She was 4.5 months pregnant when she was threatened by her boyfriend's ex-girlfriend. I mean, and this was in 2000. So it was just 4 years before the trial. I mean, can you imagine? You're a pregnant woman threatened by your boyfriend's ex-girlfriend. Could she have any more leaning toward...
That's called prejudice.
Yeah.
I think she may be a little biased.
Yeah, I think that's a really good... And I'm relying on you here, Producer Mark, because you're the legal eagle. So...
I'm not, but...
You are. I know you're not, in the world of criminal law, but you know enough about the law. You need
to disclose that I'm not an attorney. I just work in the law. I'm not an attorney.
Yeah, Producer Mark's not an attorney. So, I will tell you that during this trial that went on for a very long time, and I was pretty disappointed in Mark Garagos, who I think is a really brilliant, interesting man, but I was pretty disappointed in the way he represented Scott. I also am not saying Scott Peterson is innocent. If you listen to episode 19, I probably said the same thing I'm saying now because I've felt this the entire time. I think he's a pile of shit. But if I were on the jury, would I be able to 1,000% say guilty?
Yeah, I mean...
I don't think so.
This is exactly what we talked about in episode 19. I think he did it. But there has... Based on what we... So we weren't in the courtroom, but it was pretty widely publicized. What I saw... didn't meet the burden of proof of being guilty beyond reasonable doubt.
Thank you.
Come on.
That's how I saw it. I mean, because he was, until Chris Watts, the most hated man in America, and I get it. I'm not saying he isn't a pile of shit. I'm saying he's the biggest pile of shit. And he's a bad liar and, just a horrible human being. Doesn't necessarily mean he's a murderer. I don't know if I buy the other theories of a stranger abduction. I mean, their dog was, wandering the neighborhood. I've gotten into a couple of very polite conversations in different Facebook groups about this case, especially with this news coming out this week. And I will tell you that 90% of the people I've spoken with have been very polite. There's one gentleman who, while not rude, is like, the preponderance of the circumstantial evidence says that a family member did it. And I'm like, okay, thanks, Robot 5000. Okay. Granted, when someone is murdered in such a personal way, you start close and you move out. However, what I'm going to tell you is a story that was told to me earlier this week that chilled me to the bone. I am the black and white girl. I like everything to be black and white, and the world is not. It's much more gray than I ever want to admit, and I hate it. I want to know why. I want to know a motive. I need to know all the details. I want all of that, and I want it tied up with a bow. And it's you beautiful, terrible, awful, wonderful listeners that have pushed me to do these open cases. I would never have done them if it hadn't been some of you beautiful listeners saying, would you please cover this case? And now I find myself immersed in things I never in my life thought I would be immersed in. So, speaking with the detective this week, he said, a burglary crew had robbed a drug dealer. And of course, the drug dealer didn't want to turn them in because he's a drug dealer. And they had tried to shoot him and they missed. And then they had robbed a second home of a not criminal drug dealer and had attempted to shoot that person and missed. That person called the police to report them. In the meantime, this burglary crew's driving around and the female in the crew says, I'll show you how it's done. They break into a home in a rural area with a long driveway in the middle of the night of an 83-year-old woman who, school bus driver, Sunday school teacher, pillar of the community. She hears commotion. She tries to get out of her bedroom window. And the female, who confessed and gave the exact quote as what happened, by the way, said, here, let me show you how it's done, took a gun, shot the woman in the face. The bullet entered her cheekbone and went down her throat, lodging into her heart, and she bled out. The ME was able to find and collect the bullet in her body and match it to the gun when they found this burglary crew.
Oh, God.
In the meantime, her adult daughter, was living with her and sleeping upstairs, heard the commotion, ran downstairs, and by the time she got downstairs, they are gone.
So this is just an act of pure evil. In other words,
yes,
they were just out robbing people. Yep. They were out, first they robbed a drug dealer, yep, then they robbed somebody who wasn't a drug dealer.
Yep, and missed shooting them both times.
Mm-hmm. And so she's like, oh, you fuckers, let me show you how it's done. I mean, you don't know how to shoot. Let me go to show you how to murder somebody.
Yep.
And they just chose a random house.
Yep.
Oh, I hope. Okay.
Those are the things that
oh my God,
keep me up at night, and those are the random crimes that are the most frightening to me. You can be worried that you're going to be killed by a serial killer, and the chances are pretty low. But a random crime like that, they took nothing. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was ransacked. They broke in with the attempt to rob, shot her in the face so that she could show her cohorts the correct way to kill someone, and then heard the daughter upstairs coming downstairs, and then they fled.
Yeah, they were just she just went in there to show them how to kill somebody.
Well, and they would have taken something, but they didn't know someone else was in the house.
I'm speechless.
Those are the cases that keep me up at night. So we know that happens. Hopefully not often, but it happens. I'm not saying a stranger kidnapped pregnant Lacey while she's walking the dog. I'm pretty sure Scott did it. But the beauty of our legal system is that you gotta prove it.
And you gotta prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And people don't think about that term very often.
No.
Reasonable doubt.
And I will tell you, there's one of Lacey's hairs that was on Scott's boat in the garage. One. Do you think she could have been on the boat when she was alive? Do you think she could have shed the hair walking through the garage? That is the only piece of physical evidence that convicted Scott Peterson. He was convicted of being an asshole.
Yeah, the jury didn't like him.
And who can blame them?
Right.
He is remarkably unlikable. He is all of the circumstantial evidence. I mean, he's either the most unlucky fuck on earth or he killed her, and the baby, which I'm pretty sure he did. So he's a month before she's murdered. He starts an affair with Amber Fry, telling her that his wife is deceased. It's New Year's Eve. He's telling her he's in Paris and he's at a candlelight vigil for Lacey, who went missing on Christmas Eve. And those calls where she's taping him are, I think that's what producer Mark said was his favorite part of the trial, was hearing, Scott like, oh, you should be here. It's beautiful. The lights. And
the lights, yeah. Yeah, they're candlelight.
Yeah, candlelight for your dead wife and son who you probably murdered. So I don't know if a second trial would have any evidence that would be more convincing, if the state would have a better case. The state did a terrible job, and Mark Garagos did a terrible job. It was just a terrible job. And I know that everything was done, it was moved out of Modesto to San Mateo County because, it was thought he couldn't get a fair trial. I don't know that fucker is going to get a fair trial anywhere. He is an asshole. But in my mind, there needs to be better proof that he did it. You can absolutely convict on circumstantial evidence. I don't particularly like that. In a world where we have a lot of other things at our fingertips to help prosecute someone. So there's something called prosecutors fallacy. And it can be reversed and used as defense counsel fallacy, but it's called prosecutors fallacy. So it's an argument that's made by suggesting that the alternative is statistically impossible. So there's this famous case that's always cited with prosecutors fallacy of Sally Clark, who was a solicitor in England. And in 1998, she was accused of killing her first baby at 11 weeks old, and then a second baby at 8 weeks old. Both were said to have died of SIDS. And the prosecution in England had an expert witness who was a professor and a pediatrician. And he said that the probability of 2 children in the same family dying of SIDS is 1 in 73 million. And that's really not true.
That seems way... come on.
So there's something called, again, that's become very popular now called mathematical ethics. And we tend to want to grab onto the science, and things change even in the world of science. We used to think bite marks were completely infallible, and now bite marks are kind of known as junk science, and I hate using the term junk science. I never want science to be called junk. But when something is proven to be incorrect,
that's what science is. Sometimes science is you try something and find that it's not true.
Right.
That's what science is supposed to be. And I remember looking at with you. I think it was a documentary we watched about bite marks. Mm-hmm. Stunning to me, because I always thought that they were fantastic evidence as well.
Right.
But, oh my.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my is a really good way to put it. So here's Sally Clark, a mother who's lost 2 babies, who is, by the way, a solicitor and attorney. And, this expert witness is saying, to me, prosecutors fallacy is trying to, and correct me if I'm wrong, producer Mark, but trying to prove a negative.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
It sounds like to me.
You know what it really sounds like to me? It sounds like that old Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes bromide that holds that as soon as you've eliminated the impossible, then whatever's left, however improbable, is where you're going to find your answer.
Okay.
And it just seems to be in that ballpark, generally speaking,
That's actually a great, I'm really glad that you know that quote and you brought that up, because, it's the 1 in 73 million underestimates the chance that there could be 2 successive accidents, both by SIDS. It could be a double homicide, which is what the prosecution said, or that it could be 1 homicide and 1 case of SIDS. So the 1 in 73 million counts out things that could have been a probability. In my mind, you're trying to prove a negative. And poor Mrs. Clark was convicted in 1999. And then there is the Royal Statistical Society. And they point out there are a lot of mistakes. This is 2002, and this mathematics professor, Ray Hill, he tried to compare the chances of these two possible explanations, that there were successive accidents, that there was a double homicide, or that there was one of each, one accident, one homicide. And then it was found that the forensic pathologist who had examined both of the infants had withheld exculpatory evidence. So in January of 2003, they quash Sally Clark's conviction. However, the damage is done. She had spent 3 years in prison, and she had developed, you lose 2 babies, you're an attorney, and you're convicted of murdering your babies. She had developed serious psychiatric problems and a really big dependency on alcohol.
Oh.
And she died in 2007 from alcohol poisoning.
Oh my, that's terrible.
Right. So if we go over a timeline of what happened in the Laci Peterson case, in December 24th of 2002, she's reported missing from their house in Modesto. January 24th of 2003, Amber Fry, the Fresno massage therapist, comes forward at a press conference and says, I've been having an affair with Scott Peterson since November 20th. And he told me he was single, that his wife had died. April 18th of 2003, California Attorney General Bill Lockyer confirms that there's been a body found on the shore of the San Francisco Bay, and that it's Connor. And then another body is found on April 14th, and it's Laci.
And just for those who don't know, Connor was the unborn child.
Yes.
That she was.
And it's something, she was 8.5 months pregnant. It's
Right.
something they call a coffin birth, which when a pregnant woman is murdered and put into water, the body expels the infant. So he was expelled from her body. He was found first, and she was found the next day. April 18th, he's arrested in San Diego. Now, he, at that time, had, dyed his hair blonde, had $10,000, had different identification, all of the smacks of OJ. It really sounds OJ. So, April 21st is his first arraignment. He pleads not guilty. May 2nd, Mark Garagos is his attorney. June 12th, a gag order is placed on all participants saying we need to preserve his right to a fair trial amid the massive publicity. He pretty much made sure there was never going to be a fair trial, being who he is.
Yeah, it really... What if he's just an asshole that just looked at Laci's death as a great opportunity? And I think immediately of George Costanza in Seinfeld. That last episode of that one season when his fiancée, who he did not want to marry, accidentally kills herself by licking bad glue on envelopes.
It was cheap, inexpensive envelopes with, poison glue.
And his glee, trying to show that he's sad, but you could tell he's just so, oh my God, I can't believe how lucky I am.
Right.
I just think this guy could have just been George Costanza.
Yeah.
Just like, wow.
Poor Susan.
How I was going to get out. I was having this fling with this chick, and I didn't know how I was going to get out of it. Now somebody killed my old lady.
Yeah.
Woohoo.
Woohoo.
I'm sorry. He's a dick.
Yeah,
and
that's
maybe,
either he's the, like I said, he's the most unlucky fucker ever, because he sure didn't get lucky for long, because it was pretty much always going to be him and no one else, or he really killed her, which I think we know he did. So Judge Girolami rules that there's no news cameras in the courtroom in August of 2003 at the preliminary hearing. September 26th, Laci's family files a civil lawsuit against Scott Peterson to prevent him from receiving money for selling his story. Of course, that didn't stop Rochelle Nice from writing a book as a juror. Asshole. If you want to get on a jury that bad to convict an asshole, think about the fact that, 15, 16 years later, you may be the person responsible for them getting a new trial.
Right. And maybe getting out.
It's on her shoulders, in my mind.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah. December 19th, 2003, Lacey's mother, Sharon Rocha, sues Scott Peterson for $5 million for the death of Lacey and Connor. The Rochas filed 2 separate lawsuits, a wrongful death action and a survival action. January 20th of 2004, the trials moved to San Mateo County. February 2nd, 2004, Judge DeLucci bars cameras from the courtroom for the entire trial. March 4th, 2004, the jury selection begins. May 27th, there's a 6-man, 6-woman jury seated in the case, and there are also 6 alternates. Rochelle Nice. June 1st, 2004, the trial begins. Judge DeLucci tells jurors June 21st that they must take care to ensure that their actions in and around the courtroom are not misconstrued. And that warning comes after Juror 5 speaks to Lacey's brother, Brent Rocha, at the courthouse security checkpoint.
Oh, I remember that.
Now, June 23rd, Juror 5, Justin Falconer, is dismissed from the jury, and that's when Rochelle Nice becomes the juror that she is.
And now she's the one thinking, woohoo, I've got a...
Yeah, I got a chance to convict this guy, and I was, beat up by my ex-boyfriend's girlfriend when I was 4.5 months pregnant, and I'll get justice for Lacey and Connor.
Oh, and maybe cash in on a book a little bit later.
Oh, God. So, November...
I had no idea about her. This is amazing.
Yeah. November 3rd of 2004, the jury deliberations began. November 12th of 2004, Scott Peterson is found guilty of first-degree murder of Lacey and second-degree murder of Connor. December 13th, 2004, the jury recommends that he is sentenced to death. March 16th of 2005, Judge DeLucci follows the recommendation of the jury and sentences Scott Peterson to death. April 2009, Lacey's parents dropped their wrongful death lawsuit. March 13th of 2019, Governor Gavin Newsom signs an executive order issuing a moratorium on executions of death row inmates in California prison, including Scott Peterson. August 24th of 2020, California Supreme Court overturns his death sentence. And just this week, the Supreme Court orders that a second look be taken at his conviction.
Man.
So that is the update to episode 19. A lot going on. Scott Peterson has always maintained his innocence. And, Rochelle Nice, thank you so much for muddying the waters and making things worse. I hope that any proceeds that came from the book you wrote with the other jurors, you thought long and hard about donating to maybe a battered women and children's shelter. And more cowbell.
If you'd like to support this podcast, go to patreon.com/JustTheTipsters.